I arrived with Christmas gifts, but my daughter-in-law shouted, "You are not welcome. Get out." I nodded and said, "Remember your words." Then I made one call that changed everything. That's how my Christmas Eve began, not with warmth, not with family, but with a door slammed in my face and my daughter-in-law's voice echoing through the snow. My name is Hazel Whitmore. I'm 70 years old, and until that night, I still believed kindness could fix anything. I was wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure to subscribe to Nana's Stories. We share real stories every day, and trust me, mine will stay with you long after it ends. Now, back to that night. Snow was falling hard in Boulder, Colorado. I drove slowly, gripping the steering wheel, trying to keep steady. In the back seat, I had a big red Christmas bag filled with gifts I spent weeks preparing for my granddaughter, Lily. I knitted her a sweater, bought her a book she'd been begging for, and even saved enough coupons to get her favorite chocolate Santa. I wanted this Christmas to feel normal. I wanted to believe my family still wanted me. When I reached my son Evan's house, warm yellow lights shimmered behind the frosted windows. I could hear faint Christmas music and laughter. For a moment, I let myself hope. I shouldn't have. The second I stepped onto the porch, the door jerked open. Diana, my daughter-in-law, stood there like she had been waiting just to stop me. Her eyes were cold, her voice colder. "You're not welcome here. Leave." Just like that. No explanation, no hesitation, no shame. The wind hit my face. The snow stung my skin. But the real pain was hearing those words so casually, as if throwing out the trash. I held the bag tighter. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the shock. She didn't care. She didn't even look at the gifts. Behind her, I heard Lily's giggle. My granddaughter. My heart sank. I tried to step forward just enough to see her. Diana moved, blocking the entire doorway. "You heard me." The gifts slipped from my hand. They landed in the snow with a soft thud, soft but loud enough to break something inside me. For a few long seconds, I stood there, breathing, thinking, realizing. Then something inside me shifted, quiet, sharp, final. I lifted my head, looked Diana straight in the eyes, and said, "As you wish, and remember your words." She blinked, just once. She didn't expect calm. She expected me to cry. Instead, I turned around, pulled out my phone, and made one call. "Franklin, I need your help, tonight." Franklin Moore, my late husband's lawyer. The only person who knew the part of my life Diana hoped I'd forgotten. Behind me, the door slammed shut. That sound didn't break me. It woke me up. And from that moment, my revenge began. I drove away from Evan's house without looking back. The snow blurred the windshield, the wipers dragging across the glass with a slow rhythm that matched the heaviness in my chest. Christmas lights from the neighborhood glowed in soft colors, but none of them reached me. Inside the car, it felt colder than the winter air outside. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and kept driving until the laughter from their house was far behind me. I pulled over a block away and sat there for a moment, watching the glow of their windows in my rearview mirror. I could still hear faint music drifting through the night, muffled by snow and distance. I imagined Lily laughing, running around in her little polar bear pajamas, completely unaware that her grandmother had been turned away at the door. That thought cut deeper than Diana's words ever could. I stayed there long enough for the windows to fog. My breath rose and faded in the cold car. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. Something inside me had frozen into a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had spent a lifetime swallowing my hurt, smoothing over conflicts, telling myself family meant patience. But sitting in that car, watching their warm house from a distance, I realized something simple and painful. I had been invisible in that home long before Diana said it out loud. I put the car back in drive and headed toward my own house. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel sharper. When I reached my driveway, I let the engine idle for a moment before stepping out. The cold slapped my face, but this time it didn't sting. It steadied me. Inside, the house felt exactly the way Diana said she never wanted hers to feel. Small, simple, lived in. But it was mine. And unlike that porch hours earlier, here I didn't need permission to exist. I hung my blue knit coat, the one my late husband bought me on our last Christmas together, on its wooden hook by the door. The fabric brushed my fingertips, familiar and warm, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to breathe. I walked into the kitchen and made a cup of hot cacao, letting the steam warm my hands. The smell filled the quiet room, soft and comforting, far more comforting than I expected. I carried the cup to the living room and set it on the table beside my brown leather journal. I hadn't written in that journal since the spring. Life had pulled me in too many directions. Evan needing help with bills, Diana wanting gifts for every holiday, Lily asking me to stay a little longer each Sunday. I had stopped taking up space in my own life, not tonight. I sat down, opened the journal, and wrote, "Tonight I disappeared from their family, but I reappeared in my own life." I paused, letting the ink settle into the page. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of the heater and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I took a slow sip of cacao, letting the warmth spread through me. Images from earlier floated through my mind, Lily waving through frosted glass, Diana rolling her eyes every Sunday when I brought food, that Thanksgiving when she sat me at the corner of the table telling me the main seats were for the younger adults, Evan standing behind her, silent every time, avoiding my eyes. He always avoided my eyes. That realization landed harder than I wanted to admit. My son didn't push me away with words, but he did with silence. And tonight, that silence had been louder than Diana's shouting. I set the cup down and leaned back in my chair. I didn't want to dwell on the past, but I needed to see it clearly. Every moment that led to this night, every small dismissal, every quiet hurt I ignored. Through the window, I watched snow collect on the railing of my porch. It looked peaceful, soft, almost clean. I wished my heart felt that way. Instead, it felt like that dropped Christmas bag lying in the snow, forgotten, unwanted, cold. Still, beneath that cold, something stronger was forming. I felt it in my breath, in my quiet, in the steadiness settling into my bones. I closed the journal and stood up. I walked to the hallway where the family photos hung. I stopped in front of one, Evan holding Lily on her first birthday, me standing beside them with a smile that reached my eyes. Diana wasn't in that picture. She'd been too busy that day to join us. The memory should have warmed me, but all I felt was distance. The woman in that photo had hope. The woman standing here tonight had something else entirely. Resolve. I walked back to the living room and sat down again, letting the quiet soak into me. My phone buzzed once, a message from Lily sent earlier in the evening. "Grandma, why didn't you come tonight?" My throat tightened, but my hands stayed steady as I typed, "I missed you too, sweetheart. I'll see you soon." I didn't say when, I didn't say how, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would not let Diana control the way Lily saw me, and I would not let Evan's silence define my worth. I placed the phone beside the cup of cacao and watched the steam rise again. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows like a reminder that this night wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of my return. And tomorrow, before the sun rose over Boulder, I would make my first move. Morning light crept through my blinds in thin, pale stripes. Boulder was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a heavy night of snow. I dressed slowly, choosing the same blue knit coat I had worn the night Diana shut the door on me. The fabric felt different today. Not sentimental, not painful, just steady, necessary. I stepped outside and locked my door behind me. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but I welcomed it. Cold clears the mind. Cold wakes what's been sleeping. My boots pressed into the snow with a clean, crisp sound as I walked to my car, each step a reminder that I wasn't turning back. Rocky Mountain First Credit Union sat at the end of Main Street, its brick walls still catching the last pieces of dawn. Only a few cars were in the lot. Perfect. I didn't want an audience. I wanted a clean slate, the kind that only comes with silence and paperwork. Inside, the lobby was warm but quiet, lit with soft winter sunlight. A small pine wreath hung on the wall, and faint holiday music played through overhead speakers, gentle, non-intrusive, almost fragile. I walked up to the counter and the young teller looked up with a polite smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I need to speak with Sheila Osborne," I said, "the branch manager." "Of course. Let me check if she's available." She disappeared for a moment. I stood there in the stillness, taking in the muted sounds of printers, clicking keyboards, and distant footsteps. I had always handled my finances cautiously, carefully, like someone afraid of losing everything. Today was different. Today I was protecting what was mine. A door opened and Sheila stepped out. She was in her 50s, tall, with silver-framed glasses and a firm but kind expression. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked. "Come on back." I followed her into her office. The blinds were half open, letting in the white glow of the snow outside. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What can I help you with today?" I sat down, folded my hands, and spoke clearly. "I want to review every account in my name," I said. "Then I want to change all passwords, set up new security questions, and block all inquiries. No one, not even my son, should be able to access information without my permission." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Of course, we can do that, but is there any risk I should be aware of?" I met her eyes. "I was told last night that I'm not welcome," I said calmly. "I'm adjusting accordingly." She nodded slowly, understanding far more than I said aloud. She opened a screen on her computer. "Let's start with account inquiries. I'll pull a list of everyone who's requested information recently." While she typed, I watched the reflection of her monitor in the window, rows of numbers, dates, names. My heart stayed steady. The cold clarity from last night still moved through me like a second pulse. Sheila turned the monitor slightly in my direction. "Here's the list," she said. "We document every inquiry, even if we decline to give information." My eyes scanned the names. Delivery services, a bill provider, and then Evan Whitmore. Inquiry about joint account options. Inquiry about shared access privileges. Inquiry about beneficiary changes. Date, 3 weeks ago. The room seemed to go very still. I didn't blink. I didn't gasp. I simply let the truth settle into place, the same way snow settles on quiet roofs. So Evan had been preparing for this long before last night. Sheila looked at me gently. "I don't mean to pry, but it seems someone was trying to gain access without your knowledge." "Someone was," I replied. "Thank you for confirming." "Would you like to add him to the security block list?" "Yes," I said, "and keep everything under my name only." She clicked a few buttons. "It's done." "Good." She printed out a series of forms, authorization sheets, security freeze documents, access block agreements. I signed each one without hesitation. My signature flowed across the paper with a calm finality, like I had been waiting years to write it. "This will prevent any changes without your direct authorization," Sheila said. "If anyone comes in asking questions, even family, we won't discuss a single detail." "That's exactly what I want." She gathered the forms, clipped them together, and handed me a receipt. "If you need anything else, anything at all, just give me a call." "I will," I said. "And thank you." When I stepped outside again, the cold air wrapped around me like a boundary line. The sky had cleared, revealing a pale morning sun. I walked across the parking lot and the snow under my boots cracked sharply, a clean, decisive sound, a sound that said I was walking away from something that could no longer take from me. As I reached my car, I paused for a moment, looking out toward the mountains in the distance. Last night, Diana took her shot. Evan stood behind her, silent, waiting for the damage to fall. Today, I took mine. Not with anger, not with shouting, not with tears, with documents. And this was only the beginning. I opened the car door, slid inside, and let the heater hum to life. As the warm air filled the cabin, I whispered to myself, if they don't want me in their home, they won't be in my finances. I pulled onto the road with a steady grip on the wheel. The future wasn't something I feared anymore. It was something I was preparing for. Maple Ridge Park was almost empty when I arrived. Snow covered the pathways in a soft white layer, and the morning air hit my lungs with a sharp coldness that felt strangely grounding. The benches, the frozen pond, the rows of bare trees, all of it carried the same quiet strength I needed at that moment. Up ahead, I saw 3 familiar figures waiting near the trail entrance. Maggie Lowell waved first, her gloved hand slicing through the icy air. Ruth Harmon stood beside her in a long gray coat, and Nora Bell leaned lightly on her walking stick, already smiling when she spotted me. These women had walked with me every Tuesday and Friday for years. We had seen each other through losses, illness, noisy grandchildren, and the small battles that come with aging. But today, they read something different in my face before I even spoke. Maggie stepped forward. Hazel, what happened? You look frozen. How I exhaled slowly, watching my breath bloom into a cloud in front of me. Last night, I said, Diana told me I wasn't welcome in their home. All 3 women stopped moving. Ruth's voice was the first to break the silence. On Christmas Eve. I nodded. Maggie's face tightened. That woman needs a lesson. Her voice came out hot in the cold air, full of the anger I refused to express myself. Nora placed a hand on Maggie's arm, a quiet attempt to steady her. Tell us everything, Ruth said. So we started walking, our boots crunching through the thin layer of snow. I told them the entire story, from the moment the door opened to the sound it made when it slammed shut behind me. None of them interrupted. None of them tried to soften it. They listened with the focus of women who had lived long enough to understand what betrayal feels like. When I finished, Maggie shook her head hard. You don't deserve this, Hazel. Not a bit of it. No, Nora agreed. Family isn't supposed to make you feel disposable. I kept my eyes on the path ahead. I won't raise my voice, I said quietly. I'll raise my documents. The cold air carried my words farther than my breath ever could. Maggie's eyebrows lifted. Ruth gave a single approving nod, and Nora let out a soft, low whistle. That, Maggie said, is the Hazel I know. We continued walking, our pace steady and strong. The white breath from the 4 of us rose and mingled, curling upward like small ghosts of everything we'd endured. The cold no longer felt like a threat. It felt like an ally, sharpening me. We reached the small wooden bridge in the middle of the park and stopped to rest. Snow dusted the railings, and the frozen creek below glimmered faintly in the weak sunlight. Ruth turned to me. You have more strength than you think. You always have. I didn't answer immediately. For a moment, the only sound was the wind brushing over the icy water. Then my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and saw Lily's name glowing softly on the screen. Grandma, why didn't you come last night? The message hit me harder than Diana's voice had. It was a small sentence, innocent and soft, but it cut straight through the steady layer of ice I'd built since last night. Maggie must have seen my expression because she leaned closer. Lily? I nodded, typing back slowly, choosing each word with care. I missed you, sweetheart. I'll see you soon. No blame, no explanation, only love, only steadiness. That was all Lily ever deserved from me. When I put the phone away, the 3 women were still watching me, not with pity, but with a shared understanding that only decades of friendship can create. If you need witnesses, Maggie said, her voice firm and ready, we'll be there. All of us, Ruth added. Nora raised her walking stick like a quiet salute. Just say the word. Their certainty steadied me more than the warmest fire could. These weren't just friends. They were a circle. Women who had crossed storms of their own and now stood ready to help me through mine. I took a deep breath. The cold filled my lungs, sharp but clean. "I'm meeting with Attorney Moore this afternoon," I said. "It's time." Maggie smiled, not a warm smile, but a satisfied one. "Good." We resumed our walk, moving in sync the way we always did. 4 older women walking through a winter park, each step leaving a clear mark on the snow. For the first time since last night, the weight in my chest felt lighter. Because I wasn't walking alone. Because I wasn't powerless. Because revenge, when done right, needs witnesses. When we reached the end of the path, the wind shifted slightly, lifting a few loose snowflakes around us. The cold didn't sting anymore. It strengthened. I turned to my friends. "Thank you," I said. Ruth squeezed my hand through her glove. "We're with you. Whatever comes next." Whatever came next, I was ready for it. And by the time I walked back to my car, my decision was set in stone. This afternoon, I would sit down with Attorney Franklin Moore, and everything would begin. The afternoon sky over Boulder carried a pale winter light, the kind that softened every edge of the city but made the cold feel sharper. I drove toward the old business district where the older buildings still held their red brick faces proudly. Franklin Moore's office stood at the corner, a 3-story structure with narrow windows and a brass plaque by the door. My late husband always said the place looked like it had been built on truth and paperwork. I pulled my coat tighter and walked inside. The lobby smelled faintly of cedar and old books. A small heater hummed in the corner, barely keeping up with the chill. Franklin's assistant looked up with a warm smile. "He's expecting you, Mrs. Whitmore. You can head right in." I nodded and made my way down the hallway. The frosted glass on Franklin's door glowed softly. I knocked once, then stepped inside when I heard his voice. He rose from behind his desk with a familiar gentleness. He had aged since the last time I saw him, more gray hair, deeper lines, but his eyes were the same steady ones that had helped my husband through so many legal storms. "Hazel," he said quietly, "come in." I sat down across from him. His office was lined with shelves filled with binders, case files, and thick books. Snow tapped lightly against the window, each sound reminding me of the night that started all this. He opened a leather-bound notebook. "Tell me what happened." So I did. I told him about the front porch, the door jerking open, Diana's voice cutting through the cold, the bag falling into the snow. I described the silence from Evan, the laughter behind the walls, and how that silence had been building for years. I spoke without shaking, without tears. My voice stayed as flat and cold as the night it happened. When I finished, Franklin leaned back, studying me with a long, measured look. "This," he said slowly, "is financial abuse." The words dropped between us like a heavy stone. I didn't flinch. He leaned forward again. "Hazel, are you ready to protect yourself, even against your own family?" I held his gaze. "I'm ready to protect my dignity." He nodded once, as if he had been waiting for me to say those exact words. "Then we'll take this step by step," he said. 3 things need to happen immediately." I straightened, ready. "First," he said, "we create a revocable trust. Everything you own, your home, your investment accounts, your savings, will be placed under the trust and controlled entirely by you, no one else." I absorbed it silently. It felt less like protection and more like breathing room. "Second," he continued, "we draft a new will. Diana and Evan will be removed as beneficiaries. The only one remaining will be Lily." My chest tightened, not from hesitation, but from certainty. "Good. And third," he said, tapping his notebook lightly, "we prepare a packet of evidence. Anything that shows mistreatment, manipulation, negligence, photos, texts, recordings, the incident on Christmas Eve. We'll keep everything in one place." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder, the color of winter storms, a blue-gray folder, clean, structured, heavy. "This is yours," he said, sliding it toward me. "Keep every document in here." I touched the folder. Just the weight of it felt like a shield, a weapon made of paper and ink. "When will the trust be ready?" I asked. 2 days, he said. "We'll sign everything here in my office." 2 days, 3 days after Christmas Eve. Exactly the timing that would appear later, when Diana realized what she had done too late. He turned to one of the cabinets behind him and pulled out an older file, my husband's handwriting visible on the tab. "Your husband asked me years ago to keep certain documents on reserve. He trusted you'd know when you needed them." I blinked once. He never told me. "He wanted you to feel free," Franklin said softly, "not watched over." He opened the file, glanced inside, then closed it gently and slid it next to the blue-gray folder. "These will give you leverage you didn't realize you had." For the first time that day, my fingertips trembled slightly. Franklin noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, he placed a pen in front of me. "These are preliminary forms," he said. "They set the process in motion." I picked up the pen. It felt light, but the moment my name flowed onto the page, everything around me shifted. The ink settled smoothly. My hand steadied. With each signature, the weight that family used to put on my shoulders fell away. With each line, I reclaimed something I hadn't recognized as mine in years. Franklin watched me with the calm patience of someone who had walked many people through storms like this. When I finished, he said, "Bring your friends as witnesses. It's better if people outside the family see everything clearly." "Maggie will be there," I said, "and Ruth, and Nora." He smiled faintly. "Good. Strong women make strong records." He gathered the forms and clipped them neatly. "Hazel, this is the beginning. Once these papers go through, you'll be untouchable. No one will manipulate you again." I rose from the chair slowly, the blue-gray folder tucked under my arm. "I'm not doing this out of anger," I said softly. "I know," he replied. "You're doing it because they didn't protect you, so now you protect yourself." I walked toward the door, pausing for a moment as a gust of winter wind rattled the window. The cold outside didn't frighten me anymore. It matched the steadiness forming inside me. When I stepped out of the building, the air hit me full on. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that promises more snow. My boots sank into the fresh powder on the sidewalk, and the crunch beneath my feet felt louder than before. Sharp, decisive, final. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt armed, not with fury, not with noise, but with paper. Paper on my side, paper in my hand, paper that would change everything. I walked back to my car with the blue-gray folder pressed against my coat, the weight of it reminding me that I no longer stood defenseless. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of my justice. I spent most of the evening quietly reorganizing the documents Franklin had given me. The blue-gray folder sat open on the table, its edges sharp against the soft glow of my living room lamp. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, a low hum rising and falling like distant breathing. For a moment, I allowed myself to settle. I warmed my hands around a fresh cup of cacao, letting its heat soften the cold that clung to my skin since Christmas Eve. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the clock on the wall. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that the worst part of all this had already passed. Then my phone buzzed. A single message lit up the screen. Kara Simmons, Evan's cousin, sweet girl, kind, honest. Not the type to involve herself in drama unless she believed someone was being hurt. I opened the message. "I think you should know. Evan and Diana told people you agreed to fund their new boutique. $250,000. My breath stopped. The warmth from the cup slipped away instantly, swallowed by a quiet, clean cold. I set the drink down, carefully, deliberately. A calm so sharp it almost stung settled into my chest. I picked up my leather journal, not to write, but to close it. The soft thud as it shut felt final. I stared at the screen again. $250,000. My name, used as their selling point. While I stood outside their home in the snow, they'd been inside telling people I would bankroll their fantasies. They weren't just ungrateful. They were preparing to gut whatever I had left. A slow exhale left my lungs, the kind that steadies a person on the edge of something large. I clicked Kara's contact and called her. She answered immediately. "Aunt Hazel, I didn't want to upset you, but everyone at brunch today said Evan and Diana already secured your support. I thought you approved." "I didn't," I said, my voice flat, clean. "Thank you for telling me." She hesitated. "Are you okay?" "I will be." When the call ended, I didn't sit back. I didn't think. I didn't let emotion rise long enough to sting. I picked up my phone again and called Franklin. He answered on the second ring. "Hazel? Move the signing to tomorrow morning." There was no tremor in my voice, no hesitation. He paused for only a breath. "I'll arrange it." When I hung up, I stood there for a moment, feeling the silence in my home shift. It no longer felt empty. It felt focused. My eyes drifted toward the hallway, toward the shelf where a small wooden box sat untouched for months. I walked to it slowly, each step heavy with memory. When I lifted the box, the wood was cold under my fingertips, smooth, familiar, grounding. I carried it to the table and opened it. Inside lay a photograph from decades ago, me and my husband standing on a snowy porch, his arm wrapped around my shoulders, both of us laughing. Tucked behind it was a folded note, written in his steady handwriting. "Hazel, don't let anyone take your kindness for weakness." My breath caught, not in pain, but in recognition. I lifted the photo slowly and placed it on the blue-gray folder. The faces in the picture looked so alive, so certain of the world ahead. I wasn't that woman anymore, but the strength in her eyes was still mine to reclaim. I slipped the photo into the folder's front pocket, a new page in a very old story. I opened the box further and found what I needed. A few receipts tucked there years ago, groceries, bills, things I'd paid for quietly while Evan and Diana insisted they were handling everything. I added those to the folder as well. Then I walked to my desk and retrieved a small USB drive containing the recordings and photos from Christmas Eve. The sound of Diana's voice still rang in my ears. "You're not welcome here. Leave." That sentence, when heard by a legal team, would no longer be just cruelty. It would be evidence. I placed the USB inside the folder. Next came the message from Kara. I took a screenshot and printed it. The paper slid warm from the machine, and I added it to the growing stack. $22,000 of grocery receipts from the past 2 years followed. Money they never acknowledged. Money I covered while being treated as a burden. Each page went into the folder like a stone dropped into deep water. No splash, just weight. When I finished assembling everything, I looked at the folder, now filled, structured, powerful. A tool, a weapon, evidence that could cut through every lie they had built. I stood up and walked back to the wooden box. There was one more item inside, my husband's old wristwatch, still ticking softly. I didn't take it out. I didn't need to. Just seeing it reminded me of the promise we made years ago, to take care of ourselves when the world stopped doing it for us. I closed the box gently, returning it to its shelf. Then I returned to the table, placed both hands on the blue-gray folder, and let the silence settle around me. Evan and Diana thought they were planning a future with my money. Tonight, they dug the first crack in the story they built. Tomorrow morning, that crack would widen, and by the time they realized what was happening, the entire foundation they stood on would be gone. I lifted the cup of cacao again. The drink had cooled, but the scent still felt warm, not comforting, not anymore, but steady, a reminder that I could carry softness without letting anyone mistake it for weakness. I took one sip, then I looked at the folder, and I whispered to the empty room, "They're spending my money before even asking me." The words didn't tremble. Neither did I. Tomorrow at dawn, I would sign the trust. Tomorrow, my life would shift again. this time on my terms. I woke early the next morning, long before the sun reached over the rooftops of Boulder. The air inside the house was still and cold, the kind of cold that heightens every sound. I dressed slowly, placed the blue-gray folder on the kitchen counter, and prepared a tray with a teapot, 3 cups, and a plate of shortbread cookies I didn't actually plan to eat. My phone lay face down beside the tray, already set to record with 1 tap. By the time the doorbell rang, I was ready. I didn't rush. I walked to the door with measured steps and opened it calmly. Diana stood in front, wrapped in a cream-colored coat, holding a bouquet of lilies that didn't match her expression. Behind her, Evan carried a box of pastries and a bottle of champagne, an odd pairing for 9 in the morning. Their breath puffed white in the cold, but their smiles were too bright, too rehearsed. "Hazel," Diana said sweetly, tilting her head, "we brought a few things. Thought we could talk properly." Evan added, "Yeah, Mom, we wanted to clear the air and show you our plans." For a few seconds, I didn't move. I simply looked at them. Really looked. 2 adults dressed in warmth but carrying cold intentions. They shifted slightly, waiting for me to react. Finally, I stepped aside. "Come in." They entered quickly, scanning my living room as if evaluating the property. Diana's eyes lingered on the framed photos, the fireplace, the vase by the window, calculating, not admiring. I gestured toward the dining table. "Have a seat." They settled in. I placed the tray before them and poured tea, keeping my movements slow and controlled. While they reached for cups and arranged their things, I discreetly tapped my phone once. The screen went dark, but the recording was already running. Diana clasped her hands together. "We're so glad you're willing to listen, Hazel. We know the other night was tense, but let's put that aside. Pretending nothing happened, pretending the front porch hadn't turned into a battleground, pretending betrayal was just a misunderstanding." "Let's," I said softly. Evan opened his laptop and spun it toward me. A glossy slideshow appeared. White background, bright colors, bold text. "Here it is, Mom," he said proudly. "Our Christmas boutique project. We want to build something that lasts, something Lily can inherit one day." Diana leaned forward. "And of course, we wanted you involved. You have great taste, and you know Boulder better than any of us." I nodded once. "Go ahead." Diana inhaled dramatically. "We're calling it Winterglow Boutique. Premium holiday-themed decor, curated gifts, handmade accessories." As she spoke, her voice took on a smooth, rehearsed rhythm. She used business terms she barely understood, stumbling occasionally, but covering it with more enthusiasm. Evan clicked through slides, each one filled with vague budgets, borrowed images, and unrealistic projections. When they paused for breath, I looked at them. They saw an old woman holding a teacup. They forgot that for 40 years, I balanced the books for my husband's law firm every single night. I know what a scam looks like. It looks exactly like those slides. I set my cup down and asked the first question. "What bank will you be borrowing from?" Diana blinked. "Borrowing?" "Yes," I said calmly. "If your plan is solid, why not get a small business loan?" Evan glanced at her. "Well, we figured, since you believe in family investment," I interrupted gently. "What collateral are you offering?" Their silence was immediate. Diana's face tightened. "Hazel, that's not the point. We're giving you a chance to be part of something special." "What are your break-even numbers?" I continued. "Projected revenue, actual supply partnerships? Do you have any vendor agreements?" Diana's composure cracked. "We're still working on those details." "Then why come to me for money?" Evan shifted uncomfortably. "We're not asking for much, just a starter amount." $250,000? I asked, looking directly at him. He froze. Diana's lips parted. "Who told you that?" "A little bird." I leaned back in my chair, hands folded neatly in my lap. Diana straightened her shoulders, trying to recover. "Well, yes, it would guarantee a strong launch." "And what would guarantee repayment?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. Hazel, this negativity isn't helpful. This clarity, I said evenly, is necessary. The room fell silent. Only the faint ticking of the wall clock separated the seconds between us. Diana forced a tight smile. We came here in good faith. I'm sure you did, I replied. Evan shut the laptop with more force than needed. So are you saying no? I'm saying, I answered softly, let me think. Those 4 words hung in the room like frost. Diana's eyes narrowed. She knew the tone. She knew it wasn't a promise. But she also knew she couldn't push further, not while pretending to play nice. She stood abruptly, smoothing her coat. Well, keep us updated. Evan grabbed the pastries and champagne, clearly annoyed that the visit hadn't gone as planned. I walked them to the door. Diana forced a thin smile as she stepped outside. We hope you'll make the right decision, she said. I always do. When the door clicked shut, the silence that followed felt cleaner, sharper, more honest. I waited until their car disappeared down the street before turning back into the house. Then I walked to the table, picked up my phone, and tapped the screen. Recording saved. The file sat quietly, but its presence was enormous. A full record of every lie, every slip, every manipulation. Evidence wrapped in politeness. A conversation turned into protection. I exhaled slowly, a long breath releasing everything I had held in during their performance. This was no longer a family disagreement. This was preparation, and I was prepared. The morning of the trust signing arrived with a hard silver light pressing through my curtains. Snow still clung to the rooftops across the street, but the sky looked clearer, like the storm had finally exhausted itself. I dressed with slow deliberation, smoothing my coat, tying my scarf, and placing the blue-gray folder under my arm. Before leaving for Franklin's office, I had one stop to make, one conversation left unfinished, one truth that needed to be placed where it belonged, out in the open. I called Diana and Evan just after 8. My voice stayed calm, flat. Come by the house, I said. There's something important we need to discuss. They arrived 20 minutes later, hopeful, smiling, carrying the same brightness they used whenever they wanted something. Diana brought flowers again, this time red tulips wrapped in glossy plastic. She held them like a peace offering she didn't believe in. Evan lingered behind her, clutching a folder of his own, trying to look confident but unable to meet my eyes. They both stepped inside quickly, as if afraid I might change my mind. Hazel, thank you for seeing us, Diana began, her voice bright and insincere. We wanted to talk more about the boutique. We know it's a big decision. I didn't answer. I simply gestured toward the dining table. Maggie stood quietly in the kitchen doorway, her arms folded, watching everything. I had asked her to come early. She didn't ask a single question. She just showed up. She was the kind of friend who understood the gravity of silence. We sat. I placed the blue-gray folder in the center of the table and rested my hand on it. Neither of them noticed the shift in the air, the cold that crept across the room. They were too busy hoping I would say yes to their fantasy. Hazel, the dependable one. Hazel, the generous one. Hazel, the last bank they hadn't emptied. Before we talk, I said softly, there are some things I need you to see. I opened the folder. The first item I placed on the table was my phone. I tapped the screen and the recording from Christmas Eve played. Diana's voice filled the room, sharp, unmistakable. You're not welcome here. Leave. Diana froze. Her hand tightened around the bouquet. Hazel, I held up a hand. Watch. Then I placed the second file on the table, the audio of yesterday's boutique pitch. Every lie, every inflated number, every hesitation, every attempt to manipulate me. Evan's jaw clenched. Why were you recording us? For the same reason you went around Boulder telling people I agreed to give you $250,000. The third item came next, a stack of grocery bills, 2 years' worth. Over $22,000 I had spent stocking their pantry, feeding their parties, covering their shortages while they pretended to be thriving. Diana's face went pale. That's just groceries. I met her gaze. Groceries you claimed you paid for. Groceries you asked me to cover just this once, more times than I can count. The fourth item hit harder. The printed screenshots of Kara's messages. The proof they had bragged about Hazel agreeing to fund everything. Diana swallowed hard. That was just talk. It was a lie, I said. A lie you used to raise your standing in the community. A lie you used to gain leverage. A lie told behind my back while you were shutting me out of your home. They stared at the papers, but the worst was still ahead. I reached into the folder and placed the final document on the table. The pre-signed trust packet. Thick, official, undeniable. Their eyes darted across the headings, the signatures, the legal seals. Diana whispered, "What? What is this?" "This is what happens," I said quietly. "When you treat someone like a door, you can open and shut at your convenience." Evan's face reddened. "You didn't have to do this." "You asked me to leave your house," I said. "Today, I'm leaving you from my life." The words didn't rise. They didn't shake. They landed with the weight of truth. Diana broke first. Tears flooded her eyes, her breath turning sharp and panicked. "Hazel, please, you misunderstood. We were stressed. I didn't mean what I said." "Dignity is not a negotiation," I replied. Evan slammed his hand on the table. "You're throwing away your own family." "Family," I said calmly, "does not treat me like a wallet. Family does not use my name to gain money. Family does not lie to an entire neighborhood about my supposed generosity. And family does not wait inside laughing while I'm standing outside in the snow." He opened his mouth to argue again, but stopped when he saw Maggie step forward from the kitchen. She didn't say a word. She just crossed her arms and stared at them with the full, unfiltered judgment of a woman who had seen them clearly for years. Diana's breath turned shaky. "We can fix this." "No," I said softly. "You can't." The room trembled with the sound of their desperation, pleading, accusing, blaming each other, then blaming me, then turning on one another in frantic whispers. I didn't take part. I didn't defend myself. I didn't raise my voice. I stood, walked to the front door, and opened it. The cold morning light poured inside. I turned back to them. "Get out." They froze. For a moment, neither moved. Then Diana stood shakily, wiping her face. Evan looked stunned, unsure whether to be angry or ashamed. Together, slowly, they walked toward the open door. Maggie stood behind me like a silent pillar. When they reached the threshold, they looked back as if hoping I might soften. I didn't. The door they once slammed in my face now framed their exit, and when they stepped outside, I closed it behind them, quietly, firmly, finally. What they didn't know yet was simple. In less than an hour, I would sign the trust, and their world would shatter completely. The smear campaign began faster than I expected. Barely an hour after Diana and Evan walked out of my house, their wounded pride found a new weapon, the internet. That afternoon, I sat by the living room window watching snow drift lazily across the street when my phone vibrated with a notification, then another, then 10 more. The Neighborhood Connect app, the same place neighbors shared casserole recipes, lost dog alerts, and complaints about trash bins, was suddenly alive with my name. The first post came from Diana. "Please pray for my Miel. She's mentally declining. We're trying our best, but she's confused and acting erratic. We're worried." Within minutes, comments piled in. "Oh no, sending love. Get her evaluated. My aunt went through this. Don't wait too long. Yet I heard she fought with the family. What happened at Christmas?" Friends of theirs chimed in. Strangers speculated. A few defended me, but their voices were small compared to the rush of gossip. I watched the screen go quiet for a moment, then new activity spiked on Facebook. Diana had posted the same message there, paired with a carefully chosen photo of her holding Lily, looking exhausted and overwhelmed, as if she had been burdened by a grandmother losing her mind. It was cruel, calculated, and expected. I locked my phone and set it on the table. The wind outside pressed against the windows again. stronger this time, like a warning. A knock sounded at the door. I opened it to find Elaine Pruitt standing on my porch, bundled in a puffy winter coat that made her look half her size. She was a notorious neighborhood observer, curious, chatty, never malicious, but always informed. Her eyes studied me with a mix of worry and fascination. "Honey, people are saying strange things about you. Are you okay?" Her question hung in the cold air between us. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I simply stepped aside. "Come in, Elaine." She walked in tentatively, glancing around as if checking for signs of chaos. The house was spotless, calm, warm with the faint smell of cocoa. I went to the kitchen and poured her a cup of hot cacao. When I handed it to her, her shoulders relaxed. She looked at me again, searching for cracks she wouldn't find. "I'm perfectly fine," I said, my voice steady and cool. "Time will speak for me." Elaine blinked at the simplicity of the answer. She nodded slowly, almost respectfully, before murmuring something about stopping by later and slipping out the door. The moment she left, I picked up my phone again and called Franklin. He answered with the calm tone of someone who expected the storm. "I assume you've seen the posts," he said. "I have. They're trying to declare you incompetent," he continued. "If a person is legally seen as mentally unfit, their financial control can be stripped. They want access to your assets." My voice didn't waver. "Then let's make it impossible." There was a small pause on the line, the kind where someone acknowledges resolve. "I'll call Dr. Eris at the Private Diagnostic Institute," he continued. "He's a forensic psychiatrist. It's expensive for a same-day emergency evaluation, but his report is ironclad in court." "I don't care about the cost," I said firmly. "I care about the truth." "Good. Be there in 30 minutes. He's clearing his schedule for us." When the call ended, I grabbed the blue-gray folder from my table and slid it into my bag. The folder felt heavier than usual, not because of the papers inside, but because of what Diana and Evan had forced me to do. By the time I arrived at the private institute, the sky had turned a dull silver. Franklin met me in the lobby, coat still on, carrying his briefcase. "You ready?" he asked softly. "I've been ready," I said. The evaluation process took nearly 2 hours. Memory tests, cognitive puzzles, attention assessments, logical reasoning drills, a long conversation with a clinical psychologist. I moved through each part calmly, almost mechanically, letting decades of discipline steady me. I answered questions, repeated sequences, solved problems, all without the faintest tremble. When the tests ended, the lead doctor, a woman in her 40s with bright eyes, looked up from her notes. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said with a warm smile, "you have an exceptionally sharp mind, excellent recall, strong reasoning, no signs of cognitive decline." She handed me the printed report. "Frankly," she added, "I wish half the people your age tested this well." I thanked her quietly. Franklin and I walked out of the room and into the hallway where the winter light spilled through tall windows. He took the report from my hand, scanned it, then nodded with quiet satisfaction. "This document alone destroys their attack," he said, sliding it into the blue-gray folder. The folder seemed to accept it like a perfectly cut puzzle piece, a new weapon joining the arsenal. I watched him close the folder with a soft click. "Good," I said. We left the hospital together in silence. Outside, the cold was sharp enough to sting, but it didn't bother me. Not today. The truth was colder, stronger. As we approached our cars, Franklin stopped and glanced back at me. "You know," he said, "most people break when family turns on them, but you haven't wavered once." I met his gaze. "When people show you what you mean to them," I said, "you either retreat or rise." "And you?" he asked. "I rise." Back at home, I placed the blue-gray folder on the dining table. The newly added evaluation sat neatly behind the trust documents, the financial records, the recordings, evidence, truth, protection. Outside, the wind howled across the neighborhood. Inside, my house felt brighter than it had in days. Diana and Evan wanted me weak. They wanted me confused. They wanted me declared unfit so they could access everything I owned. But now, they had nothing to stand on. And soon, they would have nowhere to hide. Late afternoon settled over the neighborhood like a heavy gray blanket. The sky dimmed early, and the quiet inside my house felt deeper than usual. I had just returned from St. Mary's, the blue-gray folder resting on the table like an anchor. The evaluation papers were neatly placed inside, sharp, official, undeniable. I was pouring myself a cup of cacao when a soft knock tapped against the front door. Not frantic, not angry, just small. I set the cup down and walked toward the sound. When I opened the door, the cold air rushed in, and behind it stood Diana, her eyes swollen and red, mascara smudged beneath them. Beside her, clutching her coat sleeve, was Lily. "Hazel," Diana whispered. "We need to talk." She looked different this time, deflated, desperate, stripped of the sharp confidence she wore like jewelry. Evan wasn't with her. I didn't move, didn't open the door wider, didn't invite them in. We stood like that for several seconds, the cold creeping in between us. Mom, Diana's voice broke. "Please." Finally, I stepped back one single pace, just enough space for them to enter, nothing more. They walked in quietly. Lily rushed to me first, wrapping her arms around my waist. I stroked her hair gently, but my eyes stayed on Diana. We sat at the dining table. Diana kept wiping her face with trembling fingers. "I didn't mean for things to go this far," she said. "I was stressed, overwhelmed. I said things I shouldn't have said." Her voice cracked as she forced the excuses out one by one. "You understand, right? We've all been tense. We've all said things when—" "You tried to destroy my mind," I said softly. Diana froze. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. I continued, still calm, still precise. "You told the neighborhood I was mentally declining. You told people I was confused and losing control. You weren't stressed. You were strategic." Diana's hands shook. "Evan said it was the only way," she burst out. "He told me you were losing your memory, that you were acting strange, that—" "So you believed him?" I asked. She didn't answer. Her silence was enough. Lily tugged gently at my sleeve. Her little face tilted upward, eyes wide with worry. "Grandma, are you sick?" That small question hit deeper than any accusation, but I refused to let it break me. I knelt down, smoothing her hair as I held her close. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "I'm perfectly okay." Her shoulders relaxed immediately, as if she'd been holding her breath since she walked in. I stood again and reached for the blue-gray folder. Diana's eyes followed the movement, dread rising in them like a tide. Without a word, I opened the folder and slid a single document across the table toward her. The medical evaluation. The words at the top in bold letters, full cognitive function, no signs of impairment. Diana stared, her face drained of color, her breathing hitched. "If you're wondering," I said quietly, "the test was done today, comprehensive, detailed, verified." She swallowed hard. "Hazel, I didn't know. Evan told me that I was forgetting things," I finished, "that I wasn't stable, that my friends were manipulating me." She nodded weakly. "And you believed him because it was easier," I said. "Easier than admitting you were wrong, easier than facing the truth." Diana clutched the paper like it was burning her fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I looked at her for a long moment. The same woman who had shut a door in my face now sat trembling in my dining room, realizing the trap she had set had closed on herself instead. "You told me to leave your house," I said slowly. "Today I'm telling you to leave my life, unless you change." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her breath broke into sobs, soft at first, then louder, shaking her shoulders. She held Lily close, burying her face against her daughter's hair as if trying to hide from her own actions. "I never wanted to hurt you. she cried. But you did, I replied. And you didn't stop. Not even when you saw the damage you caused. Diana covered her face with her hands. Her apology spilled out in pieces, regret mixed with fear, shame tangled with desperation. She begged, she pleaded, she explained, but none of it erased the truth. Actions speak louder, and hers had screamed. When the sobbing finally slowed, I stood and walked to the door. I opened it, letting the cold air rush in again. Diana hugged Lily tightly, then rose to her feet. She glanced at me, hoping for softness, for forgiveness, for something familiar. But I had no softness left for her, only boundaries. Unless you change, I repeated quietly, leave my life. Her face crumpled. She turned toward the door. Lily gave me one last long look, sad, confused, loving, and then followed her mother outside. The hallway echoed with Diana's choked sobs as they left. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Not a slam, not a battle, just closure. I stood there for a long moment, the silence settling around me again. Tomorrow, the world would shift even further. Morning light crept through the blinds in thin, pale lines. Boulder was quiet under a thin layer of new snow, soft enough to make the world look forgiven, even if forgiveness wasn't something I was ready to hand out. I had just finished folding the blanket on the couch when my phone rang. Franklin's name appeared on the screen. I answered. "Good morning, Franklin." His voice came through steady, controlled, but with a hint of satisfaction beneath it. "Hazel. His lawyer just withdrew. There's no case." I stood still. No case, no hearing, no petition, no challenge to my competency. Diana and Evan had tried to drag me into court, insisting I was no longer capable of managing my own life. But the full medical evaluation said otherwise, and the revocable trust protected everything else they hoped to reach for. Franklin added, "They have nothing. No evidence, no legal standing, no access. Your documents are airtight." In the background, I heard shouting, Evan's voice sharp and cracking under pressure. Franklin didn't mute the line. He let me hear it. "You lied to me," Evan shouted. "You said this would work. You said she was slipping." Franklin replied calmly, "Your mother is legally untouchable." The words landed like a final stone, sealing a tomb. Evan cursed, the sound abrupt and raw. Then the line went silent. Franklin must have stepped out of the room, leaving Evan to drown in the consequences he created. "I thought you'd want to know right away," Franklin said, returning to me. "How do you feel?" I exhaled slowly. "Relieved isn't the right word," I said. "It's quieter than that." He understood. "You earned this quiet." We ended the call, and the house slipped back into stillness. I put on my winter coat and boots. There was still one thing left to face today. The HOA winter meeting, the very place where the rumors had begun. The neighborhood hall stood at the end of a long, tree-lined street. Snow crunched under my feet as I approached, each step firm, deliberate. People were gathered inside, murmuring in small clusters. I could feel their eyes turn toward me as I entered. Some looked apologetic. Some looked guilty. Some looked ashamed for having believed even a fraction of what Diana posted. And then I saw her, standing near the back wall, arms crossed tightly, eyes downcast. Diana looked smaller than I had ever seen her, as if the weight of every lie she had spun was dragging her downward. Evan wasn't with her. Elaine Pruitt spotted me first. She hesitated, then walked over, hands clasped. "Hazel, I'm glad you're here," she said quietly. "People need to hear the truth." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. When the meeting began, the HOA president cleared his throat. "There have been concerns raised online about one of our residents." A ripple ran through the room. Elaine stood up. Her voice cut through the hall. "I visited Hazel myself. She's completely fine, more than fine. She was calm, collected, and kind enough to offer me a drink while I was being nosy." Soft laughter broke the tension. Elaine continued, The things being said about her online aren't just untrue, they're harmful. We owe her better than gossip." Several neighbors nodded. A few clapped. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't bow my head. I simply stood there, quiet, steady, unshaken. Diana's face flushed pink, then red. She looked at the floor, twisting her gloves in her hands. The room's atmosphere shifted around her. Whispered sympathies that once belonged to her were now drifting toward me. For the first time in weeks, I felt the balance tilt. After the meeting, people approached me one by one. "I'm sorry, Hazel. We shouldn't have believed it. If you ever need anything, let us know." I nodded politely, accepting their words without holding on to them. Their approval wasn't something I needed, not anymore. When I stepped back outside, snowflakes drifted slowly from the sky. Light, soft, weightless. I watched them melt on my coat sleeve. It felt like the world was rinsing itself clean. The next morning, I drove to St. Helena Home, an assisted living center tucked behind tall pine trees. The air smelled of winter and pine resin as I walked through the sliding doors. The staff recognized me immediately. The manager hurried over, her arms already stretching for a hug. "Hazel, you came." Her voice trembled with warmth. I smiled gently. "Of course." "You don't understand," she said, pulling back to look at me. "Your donation saved us. We were months away from shutting down one of the wings. Because of you, we stayed open." I nodded. I'm glad it helped. She led me down the hall where a group of older women sat around a table, knitting, talking, laughing softly. Some had no family left. Some had children who rarely visited. Some had lived full lives but needed a place that held them gently now. When they saw me, one of them, a petite woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, smiled and said, "You're one of us now." Something warm flickered in my chest, something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not anger, not vindication, not triumph, but belonging. I sat with them, letting the soft rhythm of their conversation carry me. No one asked about the rumors. No one asked about Diana or Evan. They asked about my knitting, about the cold weather, about whether I preferred vanilla or peppermint cocoa. Simple things, human things. By the time I left, the morning had softened into early afternoon. Snowflakes drifted lazily around me. I breathed in the cold air, feeling it fill my lungs more lightly than it had in a long time. Peace wasn't something handed to me. It wasn't something achieved by winning a legal battle or exposing a lie. Peace was something I walked toward, step by step, decision by decision, until the noise behind me faded. And as I drove home, I realized something. I wasn't rising above the chaos. I was rising out of it, in silence, in strength, in absolute clarity. Tomorrow, the final chapter would begin. 3 days passed, not loudly, not dramatically, just 3 slow winter mornings drifting by like cold breath on glass, the kind of days where the world feels muted, as if waiting for something to settle. On the 3rd morning, I woke before the sun. My house was still, quiet in the way only a winter home can be. I slipped my feet into warm slippers and walked across the wooden floor, each step soft but echoing just enough to remind me I was alone and at peace. When I reached the front door, something made me pause. A feeling, a stillness, a hint of expectation in the air. I opened the door. A white envelope lay on the doormat, edges dusted with snow. No name, no stamp, just the weight of something unfinished. I bent down and picked it up. The paper felt cold against my fingers. Inside, a handwritten letter. Diana's handwriting, tight, uneven, rushed. I stepped back inside, closed the door gently behind me, and walked to the kitchen table. The kettle clicked softly as I set water to boil. Only then did I open the letter. "Hazel, I'm so sorry. I didn't deserve your kindness, and I know it now." The words blurred for a second, not from tears, but from the heaviness of finally being seen. I kept reading. Evan told me to file for incompetency. He told me it was the only way to get control of the finances. I believed him. I shouldn't have. He asked me to write statements, to talk to neighbors, to post online. I did everything he asked because I thought it would protect our future. My breath slowed, but I didn't know the cost. I didn't know it meant hurting Lily's grandmother. The kettle clicked again, finishing its boil. I didn't move to pour it yet. I've filed for divorce. I've started therapy. I need to fix myself before I can fix anything else. A long pause in the writing. The ink changed shade as if she had stopped and returned. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to trust me. But please, please don't take Lily away from me. And please don't let her lose you. She loves you. She needs you. My fingers lingered on the last lines. Please let Lily keep her grandmother. I'm sorry, Hazel. Truly. Diana. I set the letter down. Beside it, my phone screen lit up. A notification from voicemail. It was Evan. He had called at 2 a.m. I pressed play, keeping the volume low. His voice filled the quiet kitchen, slurred, broken, sounding like he was calling from a crowded bar or a lonely street corner. Mom, it's me. Look, I'm staying at a motel on 4th Street. Diana kicked me out. If you could just call me back, maybe I could crash in the guest room for a few days, just until I get back on my feet. Mom? The message ended with a click. No apology, just need. Even at rock bottom, he was still asking for a handout. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply pressed delete. My body didn't react the way a younger woman's might have. Instead, I let out a long breath. A release, not a wound. The truth was clear. Diana hadn't changed overnight, but something inside her had cracked open just enough to let honesty in. Still, honesty wasn't the same as redemption. I walked to the counter and poured hot water into my favorite mug, letting the cocoa swirl into a dark, warm cloud. The smell filled the room, rich and soft, an anchor in my morning ritual. I carried the mug to the table, opened my journal, and wrote slowly, letting each word settle into its place. Forgiveness isn't a door she can open with words. She must walk to me with actions. The ink dried smooth on the page, a full stop, a boundary, a truth. I closed the journal gently and placed it beside the letter. Both belonged to this chapter, but only one would shape the next. After finishing my cocoa, I opened the curtains. Snow drifted outside, thin and quiet, the world washed in pale light, the kind of morning that felt like a fresh page, clean, open, waiting. I stood there for a while, watching the flakes fall in slow spirals. Not angry, not triumphant, just steady. Behind me, on the table, the envelope remained untouched, exactly where I'd left it. I wouldn't throw it away. I wouldn't answer it yet. Some truths needed time to breathe before they could move. But one thing was certain. The life I was rebuilding wasn't defined by Diana's regret or Evan's betrayal. It was defined by my clarity, my ability to stand firm without cruelty, to protect myself without becoming someone I didn't recognize. 3 days had changed everything. Not for Diana, not for Evan, for me. I turned away from the window, feeling the quiet strength settle into my bones. The storm had passed. What came next was mine to choose.